guys here aren't supposed to get to Bethlehem until Thursday, but we won't be here in church on Thursday, and one of the options for our gospel reading today is their story, so I think I'm going to go ahead and carry you over there, and just don't tell me. So we have this wonderful story today about these wise men from the east come seeking the newborn King of the Jews, the Messiah of Israel, bringing their gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, come following a star. It's a wonderful story and a terrible story, because while the people of that region far to the east of Jerusalem were known in the ancient world for their knowledge of the stars and for their skill in divining spiritual realities and even foretelling the future by reading the stars, the star only got them as far as Jerusalem. And from there, they had to rely on the knowledge revealed to the prophets in the Hebrew Scriptures to guide them on their last few miles to their destination. And the keepers of that knowledge, the scribes and the elders in Jerusalem, were under the rule of Herod, a king of sorts, king who was a client ruler, who was maintained in power by the Roman emperor. And as long as Herod kept the tribute flowing to Rome, he could pretty much carry himself like a king and do whatever he wanted. He was renowned for his cruelty, his ruthlessness and ambition. It's widely believed that he killed at least a couple of his own children who might have risen up and challenged him to become rulers in his place. And we don't really hear about it in the reading today, but if we go on the second chapter of Matthew, that bloodthirstiness of Herod will become evident. He doesn't send the wise men to Bethlehem so that he can go and do homage to the newborn Messiah. He sends them there, as it were, as spies to bring back knowledge to him so that he can go and exterminate this potential rival. Now, it's very unlikely that any of this actually happened, historically speaking, though it does have, as I've alluded, its foundation in history, certain historical truths. But it also has its foundation in Hebrew prophecy. The star, after all, was a symbol of David, or widely interpreted that way, as anyone who's seen the flag of modern Israel can tell you, and by extension, a symbol of the heir of David, the descendant of David who would restore the kingship and save his people from their enemies and oppressors. And there are many other elements of this tale that evoke aspects of the Hebrew Scriptures. If we read on, we'll hear about how to flee from the wrath of Herod, Joseph, like his namesake back in the book of Genesis, Joseph, the son of Jacob, went off to Israel or to Egypt Joseph, the father of Jesus, took his family to Egypt to escape from the wrath of Herod, just as Joseph went down to Egypt in the story in Genesis and prepared the way for his people to come and take refuge there in a time of famine. So Matthew, or whoever it was that wrote this story, drew very freely and creatively on many different elements of history, both sacred and secular, and upon the powers of the human imagination. And this story, like the story that we heard on Christmas Eve from the Gospel of Luke, is a nighttime story. It's a story that has a dream-like quality, that draws on the elements of dream and imagination and, as it were, the unconscious. It's a story that opens the door to contemplation and not merely to the verification of facts in the exterior world. Its meanings are deep and many and speak to our imaginations as much as to our rational, inquiring minds. This past week, I was up in Lake County on the south side of Clear Lake between Lower Lake and Kelseyville. We rented a little lakeside cabin with some old friends from our Berkeley days and just had a little bit of time for rest and recreation. And it was mostly cloudy and cold and rainy, and we even had some snow flurries. And no one was willing to get into the lake except my Labrador Retriever, who had a blast, and a close encounter with some otters. That's another story. But one night, I took her out to have a final pee before bed, and for just a brief moment, the clouds parted and I could see the night sky. And up there, of course, the light pollution is a lot less than it is around here. And I could clearly see the Milky Way and Orion and the Pleiades and the Dog Star. And it was a moment of great beauty and wonder at the mystery of God's creation. The collect prayer that opened our service today speaks of human nature, the human nature that was wonderfully created by God, and yet more wonderfully restored by God in Christ's incarnation, who shared our human nature and restored it to its dignity. And this story from Matthew, like the other Christmas stories, invites us to see how this was something that happened, as it were, the working out of a divine plan that was evident not only in historical events and in human affairs, but could be read in the stars. Something that places us as human beings back in connection with that most magnificent and vast universe of which we are a part. That we are created not as isolated and impoverished little creatures scurrying around like ants on the surface of this earth, but that we are inextricably connected with God's unfolding mystery of creation. And we know this with an even greater profundity now than was known in the time that the Gospels were written, because our modern science has enabled us to plumb the depths of the universe and to grasp, at least in a superficial sense, the ungraspable age of the universe and the immeasurable extension of the universe, and the truth that it is continually expanding and has a circumference that is equally distant from every point within it, so that we ourselves, mysteriously enough, are at the very center of it, like every other point in it. And it is this evocation of the divine mystery of creation that Matthew chooses to invoke at the beginning of his story of Jesus, to remind us that we know Christ best, not only as words written in a book, but in the contemplation of the beauty, the mystery of what God has made and what continues to unfold around us. That beautiful and irreducibly mysterious truth of God's love and grace, of which we are intended to be recipients, heirs with Christ, and to live for the praise